there's this lingo that you guys use in prayer, especially. I've seen it with Temple Hayes and Michael Beckwith, and obviously the two of you. And something that uh, comes up is the fact that we have this wholeness inside. And Savannah, I believe what one of the things that you said was that we have this love and this light inside us, despite what may be happening on the external. And that is something that I've struggled with at times where, especially recently with everything that's happening with COVID and politics and, Black Lives Matter and all these things that are coming up for us in 2020, it can be really kind of daunting for me to maybe not accept, but observe that despite all of that, all of the craziness outside, there is this wholeness inside. And so I thought perhaps we could go on a journey today and maybe explore that a little bit. And so Savannah, I'll kick it to you first because it was your prayer. And so I'd like to see kind of, I know that it's not so much a conceptual thing. It's not something necessarily for intellect, but rather embodiment. And so what does that really look like for you?
So thank you so much for having me again. It's exciting to be back with you guys. You guys are amazing. So I want to go back. When I first discovered my spiritual path, when I kind of fell into it, and I walked into a spiritual center in Denver, Colorado, and the minister on the stage said, "You are whole, you are perfect, and you are complete." And I just remember sitting in the sanctuary just sobbing because I was not raised in a religion that taught me that I was loved, that I was, whole, that I was perfect and complete and all of those things. And so hearing it for the first time, it was definitely conceptual. It was definitely like, are you sure? I don't even know what that means. Like, how do I even connect to that? But through years of, as you said, embodiment, through years of study and classes and my own prayer work, my own, I would say, cultivation with a higher power, with the God of my understanding. You could call it love, intelligence, you could call it the universe. I started to discover that what I was seeing on the outside world was just a reflection of an internal belief system and stuff that was coming up within me that was either unhealed stuff, like hidden beliefs, or things that I really believed to be true about me. And so the more I started to hear it, the more it was like, yeah, that resonates with me. That is absolutely true for me. And it just became a way of being. So as you just said, not an intellectual thing, but a beingness. And it's the same with prayer. I have students all the time who, when they're starting to learn an affirmative prayer, a way in which to speak in the world, to change their semantics completely from a negative, I can't, attitude to something more positive, more life affirming, it's usually an intellectual process to begin with. And then what happens is the more we do it and the more we connect with source, with God, with love as our beingness, it's a beingness, then we discover the words flow and the emotion flows. And then eventually, for me, prayer just becomes what always comes out of my mouth, right? Like just the centering itself, there's no effort. And so I would say to launch us off here, it's a beingness. And that takes practice and continual discovery.
Mm. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. TJ, what do you think?
Wow, so beautiful, Savannah. Thank you for that. And as you were speaking, I was reflecting on my own journey in New Thought, and I was just struck by the similarity. And I think that that's a really common story, whether it's New Thought or a meditation practice or a yoga practice. But I'll talk about my journey because it's so paralleled. I walked into a Unity Church in Dallas, so it was a little different maybe than a Centers for Spiritual Living, I'm guessing, in Denver, but a spiritual community where they were speaking this language that in one sense was so counter to my BS belief system, but energetically was so congruent. And you said that so beautifully, right? Because I didn't grow up in any kind of like shaming religion. I grew up in what I call guilt-free Catholicism, right? The Anglican Church, the Episcopal Church. But there was still this idea, no one was standing up in front of the room and saying, you are whole, you are complete, you are a divine being, you are a particle of God energy, of source. That was not the conversation, right? And of course, in culture, I picked up this idea that I was broken. But more than that, I had deeply held beliefs, and Savanna, you spoke to that so beautifully, right? Because it's not just that I believed I was broken, it's that it had gotten really locked in my body, and it was a sense, an idea, a vibration, a frequency of brokenness. What is so profound about what we're talking about, and what Savanna, you beautifully opened us up with, is underneath all that brokenness still was this whole and perfect being. And when I heard the words, my intellect resisted, but spirit resonated. And so if anything, it was a little confusing walking into New Thought, because I was like, wait a minute, what is this? I'm whole and complete, right? Because I had thought, once I get this, I'll be okay. Once I get that, I'll be okay. I had already started doing counseling, therapy, recovery. So I knew enough to understand I had some work to do. But what I thought the work was resolving all of this, changing my thinking, changing my story, making peace with everything. But then I came to New Thought, and it wasn't necessarily said this in this way, word for word, but what if the starting point or the foundation? That's why in New Thought we have classes called foundations, like Foundation 1, Foundation 2, right? In some of the traditions like Agape and Centers for Spiritual Living. The foundation is underneath everything that's ever happened, there's still this whole and perfect person. And that it's not an outward search, but a returning to our own wholeness. I know a topic that the three of us love is shadow. I'm sure we can talk about that. What I want to say at this moment is, because I had believed in the lie that I was broken, and because, as Savanna said so perfectly, because I believed that, then I was projecting it everywhere. I was unconsciously looking for the world to confirm the core false belief. Yeah, I am broken. See, look, here I am in another relationship that's broken. And the inner dialogue was like, oh, why does this keep happening to me? Right. But what was really happening, I know now, is it's very simple. The law works. And when I say the law, what I mean is the law of frequency, energies that align, thoughts create reality. But of course, the embodiment of this is the deeper work. And for me, that took a good decade in New Thought. Not that I wasn't doing it right in the beginning, but there were like these stages of it. I did, as Savanna said, start with an intellectual understanding. Oh, wow. What if I could change the way I speak? And what would that create? So really, the thing that I want to just highlight at this moment is that a lot of times we come into spiritual practice or recovery or counseling or therapy, and we think we're searching for something, which we are, but the search is actually a returning to what's already present with us. And that's fundamentally different. And that's the foundation of New Thought.
So good.
Yeah, thank you, TJ. I think you're pointing to something really powerful, and that is because you two have so much experience, and TJ, what you named, having been in recovery, excuse me. So I've been in recovery for 11 years. And so there's no shortage of inner work, as they would say. Like all the Instagram memes yelling at me to do my own work. I can check that box, right? But what's interesting is that only when I met you, TJ, did I realize, wow, there's a lot more to this than action. It's really a matter of being as opposed to doing, which is, in recovery, it's a lot of doing. It's, doing the steps, doing your program, going to meetings. And it's rarely does it come back to simply being. And so my big barrier came when you and I first met, and you said, yeah, I'm writing this book, and the foundational principle is that underneath all addictive behavior is a whole and perfect spiritual being. And I was like, wait, what? what, and even now, even years later, when we work with clients, and sometimes I'll hit them with that, and you can see this physical reaction of resistance. And so to tie in the shadow stuff for me, what I recognized was that over the years, especially early in recovery, there was so much happening really deeply that I didn't look to, I didn't talk about, I didn't bring it to the surface. I knew it was there, but I kept it there because that was a piece of me that it was always going to be that way. There's no amount of work that can change it. So let's just kind of not do drugs or drink and we'll be all good, you know? And so when there is this resistance to the idea that within us there exists this wholeness, this perfection, is that something that lives in the shadow? Is that stuff that's coming from the shadow? And what can we do with that when we see it? Savanna, what do you think?
Gosh, I have so many thoughts running through my head. Well, I think there's a tendency in these circles, once you jump in, and things seem to be going really well, and then you get to push up against that resistance you're talking about, or you push up against the shadow. And the shadow to me is just, it's a part of ourselves that we have disowned. It's a part of ourselves that maybe we don't like, we don't want to talk about. It's the shame stories. It's the stuff that, oh my God, if this person knew this about me, they would think the worst of me, right? But when we, get into this teaching in a deeper way, and we start to recognize and at least get curious about the possibility that we are ultimately whole, perfect, and complete, despite all of that. If we could, I think curiosity is a really great gateway in this teaching. If you're not totally convinced, if you're like, no, I'm always going to be this way, just allow yourself to be curious about the possibility, or even a willingness to believe that, what if this is possible for me? So then what starts to happen, at least in my experience, is we start rubbing up and touching those shadow parts of us, and then we are at a decision point. We get to make a decision. Am I going to bring this to the surface and heal it with love and presence and awareness and coaching and support? Or am I going to continue keeping it in the shadow, which then inadvertently, which some of us don't realize, is that it continues, as you said, Reverend TJ, to play out in the world of effect. You keep attracting the same stuff in your life in every relationship, and you wonder why nothing has changed. And you wonder why it's falling apart. And you wonder why you don't get along with your coworkers, or you're not happy, here or there. And so often it's just because of the unwillingness to look at it, to at least look at it. And so some of the work I've done in the past with shadow work is, yes, it's heavy, and yes, it can be hard and painful, but the minute you are aware and you look at it, then there's the possibility to transmute it. There's a possibility to transform it. And that happens through a deep reverence and honoring of yourself. So then that gets tied to your self-lovingness and your self-worth, so then we can have a conversation about, well, how do you deeply feel about yourself? Do you feel good about yourself? What is your self-esteem? Because then that is then tied to your worthiness. You see where I'm going here? So, yeah, that's all I have to say about that for now.
TJ, what do you think?
Wow, so incredible. Thank you, Savanna. That's it to me. I'm thinking of Dr. Sue Mortar, and this is going to be a total paraphrase, but she says, life is difficult and challenging until it's not. Right. And so looking at like all this shadow work and obviously the way we created the shadow, and I love Savanna's very simple explanation. It's the parts of myself I've abandoned. And early in my life, I abandoned a lot of parts of myself. And part of it is a construct, right? There's part of it that is just simply my mind that is believed very deeply in the idea of good and bad and right and wrong. And it plays into spirituality for people because for me, spirituality and religion are two different things. Some people blend them. They're different for me, at least at this moment, because religion is ideology. It's a set of beliefs. It's a set of ideas. And they're really important. And they've led people to a wonderful place in their life. And then there's a point where they can be limiting as well, because as Savanna said, curiosity is the key here. And to say, wow, I wonder if, right? And Jeremy and I, we make jokes about how many times we either do videos or talks where the question is always, what if? What if? Wow, what if I am whole and perfect? You know, and when I came to New Thought, I started asking myself, wow, what if I'm unharmable? Right? What if there's a place within me that didn't get harmed by any of this? And then I became curious about what might happen if I changed the narrative, but much deeper than that, have the courage is an interesting word, because I think in our culture, we think it means raw, be strong, but really courage is about opening our heart. And I think there's a Latin root to the word courage that's about, coming from the heart. Allowing myself, because I had been running from my emotions for so long. And I think, we look at the 4 rooms: physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual. And to me, that's the progress of the evolution. When we're deeply living only in physical reality, then we believe that what's real, what the illusion is real, and what's real is the illusion, right? That's what Michael Beckwith says. The visible is the illusion and the invisible becomes reality, right? So if I'm living only in physical awareness and I turn on the news, I'm terrified, right? I'm terrified. This is going to get me. That's going to get me. It's not safe. I should be this because of the color of my skin. All these programs that we've been taught. And so then maybe, and maybe take this little journey with me. Maybe we come into spirituality and it starts with the intellect. We move into the intellectual room and start recognizing, wow, I have all these thoughts and they're creating this reality that I no longer want, right? Because we don't really change based on what we think we should do, but what we want. Right. And so, oh, wow, this is creating my stuckness. This is creating my limitation. This is creating the same old. I keep repeating the same patterns. And then there's this place where we move into the heart space and start to honor the emotions. And that, I think, if there's anything that I would offer anyone who's watching that's in the New Thought world, I think sometimes that's where New Thought, there's a little gap there, right? Because sometimes we're like, no, it's just change your thinking, change your life. That's it, and there are people that call themselves I'm sorry to laugh, but New Thought purists, right? That are just like, no, this is just about changing your thinking. And that was a revolutionary idea in the late 1800s. Change your thinking, change your life. That was so out there. People were like, what? I mean, that was before the power of positive thinking and all of that. But now we're looking at the deeper embodiment of this, which is moving even deeper than the emotion and into, as Savanna said so beautifully, the way of being, the beingness, moving into that place where we connect with and recognize our oneness with source energy. And once I know that, then I'm no longer bounced around by the physical world. Because as Savanna said in the prayer before we started, regardless of the seeming division in the world or the seeming conflict in the world, in the midst of that is this wholeness. And then from there, everything changes because I can become the observer of that. And that includes observing my own physicality, my own thoughts, and my own emotions. And then saying, what does it create when I believe that? What does it create when I feel that? And then we move into a place of deep empowerment, not from the place of ego, like I've got this, crush it. It's very popular these days. But it's no, I have a very deep connection and a oneness with source energy. And I know that I'm unharmable at that level. And then it really changes everything. Then I can be in the world and not of it. I often joke that I don't quote Jesus often, but that is the most powerful teaching. Maybe that's the most powerful sentence ever taught. Be in this world, but not of this world. Along with Buddha's, you can end your own suffering. Wow, look at those two.
Okay. Wow. So many questions. So I'm going to just kind of tee up a question, and I know it's kind of a big one, but it's kind of what I'm stuck on right now. And that is that you both speak to source energy, love, the universe, God as we see it. And TJ, I'm curious if you could just illuminate a little bit what source energy means to you. because I'm so genuinely curious.
So I'll answer it this way. We create the God idea in our own through our own level of consciousness, right? So when I'm in what we might call victim or martyr consciousness, I might see this idea of God as up there, out there as a savior. And so the reason I started with that is it's not really an intellectual process for me. It's really, and Jeremy, we talk about this so much. I do remember coming into this world and being absolutely present in awe of the world, deeply connected with myself, knowing, just feeling so grateful and so open-hearted. So it becomes really profoundly simple. That's my true nature. That's how I came in. So source energy is who and what we are, and if you want to get a little more esoteric, I think Rumi, when he said we're not a drop in the ocean, we're the entire ocean in a drop. And if we look at New Thought, it's possible that the Big Bang is that we were all one source, one energy, and then we became particles of that. But if we hear that through the intellect, then we can start debating it and wondering about that. And what does that mean? And do you really mean that literally? So I go into an experience, right? The embodiment is, do I remember a time when I was in this world feeling deeply connected with who and what I was before I learned the concepts of us and them, good, bad, my own limitations. We don't do that in our family. Kids making fun of me on the playground, and the list goes on and on and on. So it's really that energy source that whether, and words are so limiting because, Savanna and I, and Jeremy, you too, could probably list about 30 words that would point to this deep reality within. I believe that in Native American, well, in some different traditions, they call it the Great Mystery. Right, the great mystery, and I like that. I like that because then my mind doesn't try to figure it out. It's like, oh, this spirit thing, whatever it is mysterious, and then we get to become curious, as Savanna said.
Beautiful, thanks, TJ. Savanna, what do you think?
Gosh, TJ, you articulated that so well. I was just thinking when you were speaking about how years ago I had the opportunity to teach over in Ukraine, in the former Soviet Union, and I was teaching at a New Thought community there, very much under the radar. And I went back and forth there 6 or 7 times to teach about this stuff. And I remember very early on that because of the cultural, narratives that they have, and certain, I guess, what's the word? There were just certain things I couldn't say. So I couldn't use the term God. I couldn't use the word minister. I couldn't use the word church because we could possibly have former spies in our classrooms, saying like, this is a feel-good place, like this, you're brainwashing people to feel good. And so what I learned in teaching this was, again, that it's not, as you said, it's not an intellectual process. I had to learn the kind of jargon that would meet people where they are, and that kind of jargon for people in that part of the world was more of a scientific approach. So because religion was so oppressed in that culture of, it kind of just went underground, then the mystics of Ukraine and Russia also went underground. Mm-hmm. And so their definition of God, like I couldn't even use this term because it was so loaded, just like it's loaded in this country. Mm. And so what I could do is I could ask them a question from a scientific perspective of how can this principle work in your life? Or prove to yourself that this works in your life. You don't believe that there's a higher power? Tell me about some numinous experiences or phenomenons that you've had in your life, kind of like what you were pointing to, TJ, about asking a different question. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't a question of the intellect of, let me figure this out. It was more of, what has your experience been? Are you in tune with your feelings? Are you in tune with yourself? And so they loved words like energy and universe. And those words resonated with people so much so that they were able to then open up to the idea that I'm part of this. Furthermore, for me personally, it's been, as I said, spirituality is not linear. And it's not just like you do this and then this happens. You do this and then this happens. It's a journey. It's a process. For me, the discovery of God was a was as a presence, as a beingness. It was through so many different experiences that I could not explain happening in my life, where I was like, did I do that? Did I manifest that? How did that happen? This isn't the God of that I was taught in my childhood, so it was less about naming it, less about trying to think it out, and more of, again, the beingness of a presence of feeling it. And so I've had experiences in my life in other countries where I felt the presence of so much love and something so much more powerful than me. And it's hard to explain that intellectually.
Mm.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Wow,
Thank you both so much. You all right, DJ?
Yeah, I'm also, when you were talking about energy, I remember my own path of, whether I was aware of it or not, the cultural influences that I grew up in were really, and this is why I talk about it so much: good, bad, right, wrong, right? And religion played a role of that in my life. And I remember the evolution of a concept that there wasn't a punishing God, and then the concept of, oh, what if God isn't a being in the way we think of it, right? And then I remember thinking, I'm thinking about my own evolution, right? And then there was a period I said, my God doesn't have skin, right? Because I thought, I had personified it. I had made this God have a personality. God wants me to do this or wants me to do that. And then really, energy, I remember waking up one day and thinking, if God is energy, or it's source energy, or beingness, or true nature, there's no judgment in energy. Energy doesn't have the capacity to judge, right? That's not what energy does. Energy is something that is infinite, and then energy comes together in a particular way to create reality, right? So condensed energy becomes form. That's a foundational principle of New Thought, that thought is energy and it's actually form. And when we create particular thoughts, it manifests in that way. Now, what we're talking about is, we also know it's very, very, very much deeper than that. And so if I really understand that source energy doesn't hold within it the personality that many of us have attributed to this idea of God, that somehow I'm being judged. And it's so fascinating to me, because my family didn't teach me that. My church didn't even teach me that, but I picked it up. And I remember being a little kid, and I remember laying in bed terrified, because there was a person up in the sky keeping score. And this little 7-year-old, or however old I was, I wasn't gonna measure up. I've done more bad things today than good things. And that's so sad to me now, to think about that for a little child. How could I possibly be so bad that there's some, power up on a cloud somewhere? And so the reason I'm saying this is, there's an evolution in my awareness of source energy. And really what Savanna spoke to, that I wanted to lean into a little, is that collective consciousness is energy. Right. And that's why we can go to a place that feels so powerful, like the Great Pyramid. When I was there, and I know, Savanna, you've been to Egypt, so I know that when I felt the energy coming off of that structure, that's, 5,000 years old, that's incredible, right? Or I go to, a great cathedral. It's not the building, it's that people have had intentionality there. Varanasi, India, the place that I had my most profound spiritual experience, because that's been inhabited for 10,000 years of people going there with intention around spirituality. So that's how energy gets harnessed, is a weird word for it, but gets directed in a certain way. And then when we compress energy, it becomes form. Right. And so when a group of people come together in the standing for love, that love energy gets expressed and we see it manifested. So in the conversation of wholeness, because we separate from our wholeness, because I separated from my wholeness, started believing I was broken, that was my contribution to the collective consciousness. And right now, a lot of people are contributing to all these narratives about brokenness, division, us and them, good and bad. right? And there are those of us who understand that the greatest work we can do is work in consciousness, to know in the midst of that love is more powerful than any sense of division. And that's really what we're talking about here. Energy, source energy, doesn't hold within it personality, right? It's not a personality, it's an energy, and we tap into it and we contribute to it. I think Michael Beckwith says energy cannot be created or destroyed. He has something really articulate he says after that, something about it being channeled or something about how we use it. But yeah, I think that's all I'm going to say at this moment, because I could talk for an hour.
Wow. Thank you guys so much. I think to bring it closer to the ground and maybe look at not the practical side of it, but the embodiment side of it, with everything that's happening in the world right now, it's been interesting to see how these things show up. So as you both kind of defined source energy, I could think of so many instances in my life where things happened that I couldn't explain. And I would say, like in my head, I would say, wow, like there's something else bigger right now, because clearly like this is impossible. This could have never happened. And yet it did. And for the longest time, really until I met TJ and started, doing that work internally, I didn't ever really connect that same mysterious, incredible phenomenon happens internally all the time. But because of my reliance on the outside to provide me with what I need, I would ignore it. And I think that when we look at 2020 specifically and everything that has happened, to me at least, it seems as though this is us kind of as a society, as a culture, awakening to the stuff that has been in the shadow for so long. And, so I was in conversation with someone yesterday, and we were talking about reframing 2020, and that it's not this dumpster fire necessarily, but rather this huge time of transformation and opportunity. And what became really clear to me in that moment was that the way I have perceived everything that's happened has directly affected how it shows up in my life outside of me. And so the battle has become, or not battle, but the kind of back and forth has become evolved between my ego mind and spirit. And that is something I'm really curious about, because as we do this work, it's inevitable that ego chimes in and says, oh, dude, like, you can't do that. Like, you're not smart enough. Or, oh, you can't do that. That's for other people, but not you, right? And all these different narratives that come through. And I see that in our culture too, where there is this unity, this connection, and then ego, this collective ego mind, right, that kind of prohibits us from taking that further. So maybe what we could look at now, Savanna, we'll start with you, is what is the connection between ego and spirit, and how can we work with that stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that it's a constant dance. I know that anybody, regardless of how much spiritual work you've done in yourself, or what, if you're a guru or whatnot, we all have the balance. It's a balance, it's a dance, it's a constant coming back to truth with a capital T, as I would say. And for me, it could be a moment by moment process. It's an everyday process. So I don't separate my spiritual path or my spiritual practice or my spiritual walk or who I am. It's so much a part of my life. I don't separate it from work or friendships or relationships. And some people I've noticed, through the process of evolution, tend to say, well, when I'm at work, I'm this way. When I'm at home, I'm more spiritual. When I'm with these group of friends, I can be, more authentic or whatnot. For me, it's a practice of, can I be this way in every area of my life? So when those voices that you're talking about, when the ego starts to chime in, I'm able to discern in the moment, and become aware and be aware that, you know what, that is not the truth. So, and this is an everyday thing. This for me is a practice. It's also about my internal guidance system. So when I feel totally off, when I feel completely misaligned, it's so important that I call somebody, that I find a friend, that I go to my spiritual community, that I find people of like mind that can raise me back up into the truth of who I am, which is what we're talking about, into our wholeness, into when I forget, someone else can remind me. And that's the other reason why coaching and spiritual coaching, which is what we do, is holding the space for people when they can't see it for themselves. That's a very practical thing that I do. I have my own practitioner, and then I see clients where they're in the world of effect. They're in ego. They're in survival. I mean, you will notice that a lot of the planet right now, at least in our own country, people are in I would say, a consciousness, the collective consciousness of survival and fear and separation, as you said, TJ, and, lack mentality. And so in order for us as spiritual people to, combat is not the right word, but to raise consciousness is we have to continue doing our own work, which is what I'm empowered to do every day of my life, despite the fact that my ego is always, the humanness of me is always present. It's just how much time do I give to that? How much time do I give to my spiritual life and my spiritual practice and the stuff that I really know is going to work for me versus that ego stuff? And so I allow my intuition and I allow my feelings to be my guide. If I were to say to anyone new to all of this, in terms of this conversation, is I would just get really still and mindful of my emotions. How do I feel in my body? When I'm still and I close my eyes, do I have anxiety? Do I feel it in my throat? Do I feel it in my chest? Is it in my gut? Like, your feelings are your guide. And for me, that's when I know I'm either in fear or I'm in love. Just us centering ourselves. Like yesterday, I had a client and there was a lot of story that came out of this conversation initially. And I said, you know what? Let's get out of the story for a moment and let's pull ourselves into just centering ourselves. We did this for 1 minute. And she said, oh my gosh, that made such a difference in my mood. It's practical things like that we can do to pull us back into our center.
I love that. I love that so much, especially the piece about the ego and its nature being the humanness of us. That to me really resonates. TJ, what do you think?
I see 3 roads in front of me, so I'm feeling the energy on all 3 of them of where to go. I'll quote Dr. Sue Mortar again. When I heard her speak at Agape in Los Angeles, she said, "Only ego would want ego to die," and I just felt so powerful for me, because I do think that a lot of times we view our spirit and our ego as separate. And I love that both of you, I think you said battle and combat, right? Because, and then you both caught it. And that's the spiritual practice. That's it right there. It's like you're demonstrating it so perfectly. I don't get rid of my programs. I don't get rid of, I came up, 1970s, Indiana, United States of America, and I absorbed a lot of those programs, right? And then I come into spiritual practice and I might hear something like, get rid of your ego. Now sure, okay, let me get rid of my ego. So then, yes, that's a battle. If I'm thinking I need to get rid of it, and then Jeremy, it was so great because you said, oh wait, it's not a battle, right? And that's really the practice. The practice is awareness, awareness, awareness. So it's like, Robert Brummett in his book, Birthing a Greater Reality, said something that is just so incredible. He said, in the awakened state, personality, or we could say ego, becomes a delivery system for spirit, right? A delivery system. It's not something to be rid of. It's something to be curious about. It's something to observe. Like a small child who is acting out, love is what will help. When my nephew was really young, 2 years old, 3 years old, I was really active in his life. And of course, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds have emotional experiences because we haven't taught him it's not okay yet, right? So he's this intense experience. And my programming was to, go in, my programming from my past was, you shouldn't be doing that, go to your room, all those things that I had programmed. But what I realized was if I would get down on his level and be present with him, because it wasn't words, it was presence, he would have the emotional experience. Right? And that really is our ego. That's it, right? Can I view my ego, that part of myself, with that kind of loving presence and be present with it and aware of it? And then I can go into the questions. What does it create when I believe this? What does it create when I do that? What does it create when I believe that someone from the other political party is evil, or wrong? What does it create? And what Savanna is speaking to that I think is so powerful, and it really brings home the topic, and that is ultimate reality, that changeless dimension within ourselves. When I understand that, not here, but when I embody that, and when I really know that's greater than my ego, then I don't need to get rid of my ego. Ego can actually become a benefit for spirit. I think of, our friend Michael Beckwith, he has a big personality, right? And he uses that personality in a way to be a beneficial presence on the planet. Tony Robbins uses that personality, right, that we could call ego. But I think ego's gotten a bad rap. And I hear people saying, well, the spiritual side of me says this, but the human side says this. And really what we're talking about today is integrating that. Wow, my personality is divine. That's the foundational principle, that it's all divine. Everything, including my points of view, my perspectives, and then I can start to question them. And then there's some space. Then I have an ego, but I'm not my ego. I have thoughts, but I'm not my thoughts. And that greater reality is really what changes everything, because then I don't have to make the world change in order for me to be happy. I can be curious about what I can contribute energetically to the planet right now. And boy, is this a time that it's wanted and needed. And in closing with this thought, I'll say, you know what? Time is an illusion anyway, everyone. So there's not even any such thing as 2020. We've made it up, right? And we've also made up that we're all going to do this big thing on December 31st where we're going to let it go and have a new life. But that's right now, this moment. Happy new moment. Happy new moment. There is nothing, the past only exists in our mind, and that includes what happened 3 hours ago. And that includes all these points of view I have about 2020. It's an illusion anyway. There's only here, there's only now. And understanding that is like, oh, and of course, Jeremy and I are creating this new e-course to help people release and embrace, but it's all useful. And we're using it under the framework of 2020 because there's going to be this huge collective consciousness of like, we need to get goodbye 2020, circle with a line. We're going to cancel 2020. So there is a strong consciousness around creating something in the new year. But what I want to say is the new year, the new moment is right now.
Thank you, TJ. And I just had to laugh because, I mean, leave it to you to bring up time as an illusion when we only have 10 minutes left. But I think that would be a really good topic for another episode because it is so mind-blowing to me. But one thing that you both said that I just love so much is that, because up until right now, I have viewed ego as something to oppose or something else, something other than. And what you both touched on so beautifully is that it is a matter of reconciliation almost, of kind of bringing the two close together and not, because like most things, if it's not with me, it's my enemy. And I've been really trying to work on that to even just internally reframing it from a fight into an acceptance of or awareness of. And that has been a really rewarding practice. And I think what we see in our culture right now is a lot of people circling that same work. And TJ, I'm so reminded of a story that I'd invite you to share if you're willing to, about Mary Helen, because I think that story is just so profound, and it's what we're really speaking to about this inner wholeness and a realization of our wholeness. And so I don't know, would you be open to sharing that story?
Yeah, and I'm assuming you're talking about the airport story.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was on my way to India in 1992, and I was with my beloved Mary Helen, who was I call her my first spiritual teacher. I mean, she was my friend, my mentor, my spiritual counselor, but more than that, she was like the one person in my life that saw me as whole and perfect. She was that person for me that really changed my life based on how she saw me, right? There's so much power in the observer. And her teachings have become the foundation for all of my teachings. But we were in the airport, and she had a lot of health issues. And actually, her family did not want her to go to India because they thought she might die. And she whispered to me, I want to die in India. Let's go. Right. So like she was ready. She didn't, that wasn't what this was about for her, but we were there. She had a health issue, and the airline wouldn't let her on until she had this clearance. So we had to see a doctor. I set the stage because we had 24 hours at LAX, and it ended up being quite an adventure with the two of us staying up overnight and being in the airport. And what happened is there was a very crowded part of the terminal. There was a young mother who had an infant, very young, maybe 6 to 9 months old, and the baby was crying, like really crying. And the mother was becoming more and more agitated. And the mother actually became quite verbally abusive to the baby, shut up, just really intense. And I could feel the energy in the room. And I noticed my 20-something-year-old self was starting to judge her, like really, like how could she talk to a baby that way? And I was in all this judgment, and I could feel that in the room. And Mary Helen stood up and walked over to her and said to her, I could hear this. She said, I was a young mother once myself. How can I help you? Mm-hmm. And she chose love and acceptance instead of judgment. And what happened is the baby was still crying, but the mother then started to cry. And then Mary Helen picked up the baby and sat down with her for probably, I don't know, maybe 30 minutes. I didn't hear anything else they said. But what happened in that moment is that she chose to love this young mother instead of judge this young mother. And it would be so easy to go into judgment. That's what I was doing. My 20-year-old self was, how could she? How dare she? She's a horrible mother. And then some years later, I was in San Francisco walking down Market Street, and there was a mother with a stroller pushing, like one step at a time down the steps going into the underground. And someone yelled at her, "You're a horrible mother." And I was flashing back to Mary Helen, right? That we can choose moment to moment to be in this everyday compassion, or we can choose judgment. And then I started becoming curious. Wow, what must it have taken for her to get to a place where she could stand up in that and be love and be loving and be the beingness and move out of judgment. And I don't know what her process was. She might have judged the woman, but gotten up anyway. That might have been instinctual, but it was a powerful teaching. It was because it was the way she was being, and it was demonstrated for me. And I remember I was in tears. It was a very, very profound moment for me, life-changing.
Wow.
I just love that story so much. It never gets old because it's such an incredible reminder of what it is to be energetically in the world. And as we come to a close, Savanna, maybe we'll kick it to you for kind of your final thoughts or reflection on the conversation and what it is to realize our wholeness.
We've said so much goodness here. I think what's coming to me is there's no, as you said, TJ, there's no right and wrong. There's no good and bad about this process. That everything that we are speaking to here is just it's an opening. It's an opportunity. It is an access point. To make the decision to be kind and gentle to yourself, whatever the process is, whatever the shadow stuff that anybody listening might be experiencing, that get curious, take a moment to pause during your day and just get curious. As you said, what if I am whole? What if below the surface of all of my human stuff and all of my issues, there is something absolutely divine and whole and perfect? And sit with that question. I think curiosity and bravery, as you use the word courage, but I would also use the word bravery. This kind of work does take bravery. It takes courage to look at the depths of our stuff. It takes courage to look at the shadow and to think of the possibility that maybe I am divine. Maybe I am a divine being expressing in the world. And I have a lot of stuff going on, and I've got a lot of what people would perceive as weaknesses or vulnerabilities. But it's in that it's in our humanness, as you said, TJ, in our humanness and our divinity that we can merge the two together and integrate it. So I would just say practice. Start the practice right now, even if it's just for 2 minutes, to ask yourself that question.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. TJ, what about you?
I just want to close with gratitude. I think this has been really rich. I'm actually going to go back and watch this one because I think there's a lot that emerged. That's how spirit works. And when I'm talking about spirit, I'm talking about that deepest truth of each of us, right? And as the three of us came together with intention, there are things that emerged that didn't come necessarily from our minds, right? Not like, oh, I have an idea about what we should talk about, which is a new way of being in the world in itself, allowing the mind to have its right place. Like, thank you so much for sharing. Let me tap into the emotion and then the deeper beingness. What I want to close with is imagining that baby in the airport, or imagining my 2-year-old nephew, and this idea that's not an idea, but a practice, an experience. What would love create? What would love do, right? What is being requested here in this moment, consciously or unconsciously? And what is my role as a conscious being? What is the beingness that I want to bring to this situation, including and probably especially within myself? Can I meet my thoughts with compassion and understanding? Can I meet my emotions with compassion and understanding? Can I meet this moment right here with courage and bravery to understand that it's all not only perfectly acceptable, but it's all part of this source energy? There's nothing that needs to be rejected or even embraced. It just is in this moment. This is a greater reality. And this greater reality has been born because the three of us have come together. And that's what happens. That's how consciousness shifts. So that's, to me, the greatest gift we can offer the world. Lao Tzu said that how many thousands of years ago? The greatest gift I can offer the world is my own transformation. What's the transformation? It's returning to my own wholeness. It's coming back to that greater reality.
Wow. Yeah, this is one I'll rewatch too, TJ. I think this was awesome. I'm so grateful for you both, and to be able to come on here and, ask all these questions. And I agree that, as you were talking, TJ, one thing that came to mind was, I'll very often come into these with very little preparation, and a lot of people that, like if I bring other people with me, or, they're watching, they're like, geez, Jeremy, like, don't you need like half hour to like get ready? And actually I do my best not to, because then I'm, looking to the next question or looking for an answer. And I think that today is a really good example of what happens when we're just kind of tuned into what's there. And coincidentally, it is this wholeness that we already have. And that's what we just talked about. So it's like this crazy time loop. I'm going to have to rewatch it too. But I want to thank everybody that tuned in and watched with us. Savanna, of course, thank you so much for your brilliance and your insight and wisdom. TJ, you too, of course. And maybe on the next one, we'll just kind of start with how time is an illusion and see how much time we spend on it.
Will we remember that that's our topic?
Yeah. But that's it, you guys. Thank you so much. And we'll put in the comments and description where you can find all of us if you want to continue to work and see other videos that we've done and stuff like that. But otherwise, we'll go ahead and pause now, and we'll get one going in a couple of weeks.